This project was inspired by Ellen of Ellen J. Goods. She did an advent calendar last year, and some other people did some too. And I knew at some point I wanted to do that. So now is the time. The first thing I had to do was find a 1/4-inch piece of wood. We have a lot of scrap stuff. I was hoping that, wood's so expensive now. I did not really want to have to go buy a piece of wood because that's just going to add to the cost of the overall project. And, I want to be able to sell it for something reasonably priced. So this is what we had. It is a weird size. I based the size off these tags, which I got at Amazon, and of course they'll have to be 25 on here for an advent calendar. You can see that I have plenty of space, probably a little too much space, but originally I didn't have a frame for this, especially since it's a weird size. Originally I was going to put trim using one of the clay molds, and I still may do that. But then, when we messed with this board, it's bowed. And bowed is not good. So I thought, well, it really needs a frame in order to eventually get it nailed and glued in there where it won't be bowed. And I had a very large barnwood frame from Hobby Lobby that I've had for years. I don't even remember what I was going to use it for, but obviously, whatever it was, I'm not doing. So I asked my husband if he could cut down that frame yesterday to fit this board that he had cut for me, and he had painted it for me. By the way, the paint job was superior, but now not so much. And the reason is because after he made the frame, as he says, I always complete my projects. Well, he glued and nailed this board into the frame. When I came out this morning to retrieve it, to start working on it, it was stuck in the frame. And I was like, oh no, can you get it out? With much effort and a Dremel tool, he got it out. But he said, it's messed up. It messed up the paint. I said, don't worry about it. I'm not even going to fix that because I'm going to be putting decoupage paper over the top plus some stenciling, so no biggie. But all this was a scrap piece of tongue and groove paneling. And yeah, I mean, it's bowed, but he did prove to me by nailing it in the frame that it would unbow. Size-wise, I kind of measured this. It is like 19 3/8, weird measurement, by 27 7/8, I think. But basically, if you're going to do something like this, use an existing frame you have and measure out your little tags and figure out the spacing you want and go from there. These tags are 2 inches a hair over, like 2 1/8 wide, a hair over 3 5/8, like a hairline over. Anyway, got them off of Amazon. They come in a set of 50. So guess what that means? I can actually make 2 of these. Oops. Now, you could do so many things with this. You could just paint it. You could wallpaper it. You could decoupage over it. You could put material over it. I wanted to do some kind of textured decoupage. I looked at several rice papers that are absolutely beautiful. But honestly, guys, for a piece or 2 of rice paper this size, it would cost me probably $40 or more to put that together. So that wasn't economical. But I have this paper. It's called mulberry paper. And it averages out to like 34 cents a sheet, which is real cheap. And you can decoupage with it. It's already got one edge at least that is kind of torn. Normally using this as thick as it is, I would normally tear it in little sections and decoupage it on, because you don't necessarily, or I don't necessarily want my seams to show. But by ripping the edge here, and here's an edge that's ripped, I think by the time I decoupage it, with just a tiny bit covering that, the seams are not going to be all that noticeable. Plus, I'm going to be stenciling over the top of this whole thing, and then you've got the little plaques. So, okay, yeah, I lied about the overlaps not bugging me. They bug me. But what I'm going to do is make it look intentional. I tend to wing it on my projects, and things just come about as things transpire. Honestly, if I had it to do over again, I still wouldn't rip this in a lot of weird shapes and decoupage it on that way, because I think it would end up looking really busy, especially with what I'm going to be troweling on the top that's going to have a lot of curvature to it. So the fact that there will look like there's some patchwork straight lines in the background, I think will actually benefit. So what I got off around the edges, I'm tearing in smaller pieces here. And we'll just add some overlap lines here and there. While the mulberry paper was drying, it's time to start the rather mundane tasks of painting the 25 little tags here, I used white gesso. I like to use gesso on wood because it absorbs quickly and dries equally as fast. But I ended up painting both the front and the back sides along with the edges. The edges took 2 to 3 times. Thinking about it now, it probably wasn't necessary for me to paint the backs, because as I am planning this out, I'm thinking that I'm not going to make these tags removable. Some of them are going to weigh more than other things just because of molds and such, and I think it's going to be better to put a spot of glue on the back to keep them straight. So in addition to the tags, of course on an advent calendar you have it numbered 1 through 25. Rather than using stickers, I decided I wanted to actually use a mold, and this is the Harper mold. Now you could use hot glue, you could use 2-part resin. I chose to still use clay. I like the look, and to me it's faster in the end. But when using clay on this little tiny mold, you have to put them in the freezer and let them kind of harden up for maybe 10 minutes so that then you can pop them out without distorting the shape. So just in case you're curious, you're going to need 13 ones, 9 twos, 3 threes, 3 fours, 3 fives, and 2 of 6, 7, 8, 9, and the 0. So yeah, the prep takes a little bit of time. Back in the early 2000s, my second career after retiring from teaching elementary school was decorative finishes, faux finishing. And that business actually grew to the point where we had a store where we sold products, still did contract work, and I taught classes. So I'm referring back to my faux finishing days for this step. I have a ton of stencils from back then, and this is a Royal Design Studio stencil. I believe it's called the Small Flourish. The product that I'm using is Faux Effects Lusterstone. Y'all, I really don't know how you would mix something that would look like Lusterstone. It has some mica powder in it and colorings. They sell it in a tint base too, in case you want to buy just a small thing and make your own colors. But it's a beautiful product. You can do so much with it. Now, troweling this through the stencil, I know that I'm going to get some bleed through. The mulberry paper is not flat, so even though I put adhesive, removable, repositionable adhesive on the back of the stencil, I know I'm going to get bleed through. But I think you'll see eventually that it's really not noticeable. And actually, I think the whole thing turned out quite attractive. You'd never know that it just started with a yucky old piece of the backside of beadboard. After that first layer had dried, it's time to continue. I'm showing you here there are marks on the stencil that show you where to position. You just find that little shape. They've got several marks, but I've got to line it up and finish the top and then move downward. I moved into the sunshine outside, hoping that the lighting would be a little better and that you might be able to see the reflectability of the Lusterstone a little bit more. For me, this is the fun part of the prep work, planning out the decorative elements. Here I've laid out the tags and I have just laid different pieces of, ephemera, pictures and such that I have printed. I will go into more detail about those images as you watch me finishing the various tags. But I laid out the tags here on my dining room table and took a picture so that I would know what I wanted to put where after I had figured out what I liked, and also spacing to see what kind of room I had to maybe add some extra decorative elements around the tags, in between the tags and the frame. I am starting with tags that I want to add a texture to. There were 3 that I had left blank, so I'll let you watch here and see the progression.
After all the tags were dry, I used a little piece of sandpaper to remove the excess paper from around the edges of the tag shapes. After that, I sealed them all with a water-based sealer. I believe I used Dixie Belle Satin, but you could use any sealer of your choice. I chose to paint all of the numbers with Folk Art metallic brown. I knew that I wanted to use the reindeer from the Jingle mold on one of the tags. And even though the reindeer is a pretty good size, those horns, the little ear, they can be delicate when trying to get the clay out of the mold. So again, I put it in the freezer for a little bit of time. And I'm putting it here on the burlap textured tag. Just like the images, anything I'm applying on top of the tags, I have to keep in mind about the letters and where they're going to go so that they don't interfere. With the images, for example, there were a few that I changed and mixed up to, single digits because the two numbers covered up too much of the actual design of the picture. For some very tiny molds that I wanted to use, I I'm using Amazing Casting Resin, 2-part resin. Basically, you just mix equal parts, stir it until the cloudiness goes away. Usually around 30 seconds, you'll feel the bottom of the cup starting to get warm, and then pour it into your molds. While the castings were setting up, I knew I wanted to add some crackle to some of the tags. In doing this, I would suggest, at least what I did, was only use about 20% of the tags, so basically 5 of them. Now you could use real crackle mediums like Pentart's 2-step fine line or the classic, but that does take a bit of time, and the fine line leaves the tags very shiny, and I don't want real shiny tags. So I am deciding to use the Craquelure Stamp from IOD and Ranger's or Tim Holtz archival ink in a brown, coffee brown I believe. And I always test, you saw me there, stamp it onto the parchment paper before actually putting it on the tags. Now I removed these just as soon as they would come out because this placement you're going to see on the very first tag, I needed to kind of be able to move the leaves around a bit and poke a hole in the mold in order to eventually have the nail that will be there for the tag to hang on. And the only way to do that is if the mold is still somewhat flexible and not dried hard as a rock. I've tried to give more detail in this video because I've had several comments about, oh, please don't go so fast, or I have to watch it twice to catch all the products and things that you use. So after this little explanation here, I will make this be part 1 since it's already a 30-minute video, and then we'll move on to finishing up the tags with part 2. But right here what I'm showing you are basically 5 waxes or pastes that I have that I use, various ones for antiquing. And what I'm doing here is showing you, okay, the difference in colors. That first one there on the right was Dixie Belle Best Dang Wax in brown, but it's kind of a gray brown. Then the second one was the wax that I used on the board, Annie Sloan's dark, but I don't have very much of it left. That third one was Antica Umbra, I think. And this one is the Pentart and Antique Bitumen, very close to the Umbra, as you can see. And then the last one is Stamperia's Vintage Antiquing Paste, and it has a much more reddish hue to the brown. But this is one way that I go about thinking about, okay, what coloring do I want to use? Because to be consistent, especially with so much going on with 25 tags, I want all of the tags to be antiqued in the same coloring, just like all of the numbers are painted in the same coloring. That's going to give me a consistency across the board. So I chose to use the Umbra, and I will be antiquing the tags prior to applying most of the molds I mean, I already did the reindeer, but that was on purpose. The rest of these molds are going to be painted separately and then applied. Clear wax always goes on first for me when I'm using any kind of wax, or sometimes even the paste. You need to have a sealer, and I like to use the clear wax because it can act as an eraser. If you get the dark wax too dark, you can go back in with the clear, but you just have more control if you apply clear wax first. So I hope you enjoyed part 1, and stay tuned for part 2. Thanks for watching.